follow Deputy Jarvis back into the jury room. Go right ahead. Okay, please be seated. We need to wait for a paper change. Thank you. You may proceed. This is a proffer.
Ma'am, you were asked by Mr. O'Mara in terms of your knowledge of Mr. Zimmerman, and I believe you stated that you've never seen him.
Let me object. I know it's a proffer, but I did not ask reputation, so we're very clear. I asked for personal experience, and that's a huge difference for where he's.
Okay, I understand that, but please let me hear the rest of the question, and then I'll hear your
So he just used the word reputation.
Okay,
and
thank you. Thank you. If you'll rephrase your question, please.
Ms. Lauer, Mr. O'Mara asked you about whether your knowledge of Mr. Zimmerman, whether you had ever seen, or whatever words you used to say, never angry, and he wasn't a hothead, and never seen him upset. Is that correct? You recall?
Never.
I apologize. Never seen him upset. You recall being asked those questions?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Zimmerman had before been angry and upset with a woman that he beat up, that he used to, was his girlfriend?
I object, Your Honor. I should let him finish. I'm sorry.
Did you finish your question?
I just heard an objection, so I stopped.
Okay, well, go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll wait for the objection.
You have knowledge as to Mr. Zimmerman, the fact that he had previously had a temporary restraining order against him by a woman he lived with that he beat up.
Now, we object, Your Honor, because that's a mischaracterization of evidence and testimony. And I guess she can say what she wants, but he can't argue, for example, that he's a terrorist, and she can agree. That is a mischaracterization of any evidence that they have, and I would object on that basis. It needs to be an accurate representation of what happened.
If you'll please rephrase your question.
Are you aware that a woman, his girlfriend at the time, got a restraining order against the defendant for the way he treated her?
Was I aware back in 2012?
I'm sorry, hold on one second. I apologize. Go ahead. Were you aware, in terms of Mr. Zimmerman's prior incident involving a restraining order that was obtained by a girl that he was dating? His
Was I
girlfriend?
aware when?
At any time?
I'm aware of it now.
Okay. Were you aware of it at the time? You testified now as to your knowledge of Mr. Zimmerman never being angry, not being a hothead, and never being upset. Right now, you stated that. So my question is, are you aware that he did have a restraining order against him by a former girlfriend for violence against her?
I was under the impression he was asking if I'd ever seen him have a bad temper, be in a bad mood.
My question, ma'am, are you aware that the fact he has a restraining order, or had a restraining order against him for violence against his girlfriend?
Yes.
Okay. Were you also aware that he had been arrested for a battery on a law enforcement officer at a bar?
Yes.
Okay. And were you aware of the specific circumstances related to that man?
No.
Okay, you were just aware that he'd been arrested for a battery on law enforcement?
I heard it on the news before, but yeah.
Okay. Your Honor, that is in terms of establishing a proffer, that's what I would like to be able to ask this witness. We believe, well, I don't want to make the argument that I made to the bench already.
I might respond with questions as to the proffer.
Yes, you may.
Were you aware that the domestic violence injunction was actually a mutual one? He got one against her, she got one against him. Were you aware of that?
I did hear that, yes.
Okay, and that they were both dismissed?
I don't believe I heard that.
Okay. And were you aware that in the case where he was charged with battery on a law enforcement officer for going to the aid of an underage buddy of his who was sort of accosted by ATF agents, that case was dropped to a misdemeanor? Were you aware of that?
I didn't know the specifics.
And having been dropped to a misdemeanor, then went into pretrial diversion program. Were you aware of that?
No.
And then having gone successfully through the pretrial diversion program, that the charges were completely dismissed back in, I think it was 2005. Were you aware of that?
No.
Nothing further on.
We're gonna have to have argument. Go ahead, you
Yes,
have more questions?
I was just going to ask that this witness just remain subject to recall regarding this subject matter, and I'd like to be able to present case law and argument to the court, and I can even provide more specifics about both of those incidents. That's why I asked to proffer it, so that obviously it's done in front of the jury, our position, but I don't want to make the whole argument here, but our position is that.
Do you not want to make the argument now and have the witness remain for recall, or?
In fairness to the court, since I know that I wasn't expecting it, I want to be able to provide the case law to the court, and I don't want to hold
Well,
up
I'm sure the
matters.
defense wants to be able to do so also. So we can release Ms. Lauer for now, subject to being recalled?
That, I do have one other matter. Yes, Your Honor, I would like to have one other matter, and I don't want to also, this matter does not deal with the subject matter we're talking about. I want to be able to ask her outside the presence of the jury.
You may proffer
Okay.
again.
Ma'am, do you by chance, in terms of do you follow Mr. Zimmerman's brother on Twitter?
No.
Have you ever responded to any of his tweets or twits or whatever they call those things?
Let me object on grounds of relevancy.
Well, it's,
Even within a proffer, I think they just can't. My objection is on grounds of relevancy.
overruled.
You've never followed him on Twitter or tweet or anything?
Not
like
that I know of. I hardly.
How about on Facebook?
I don't believe so.
The reason I ask is because, and may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
May I see?
And I'll be glad to show it to you. This one.
Can counsel approach for just one moment?
Ms. Lauer, I'm showing you your Facebook. You recognize it there? I'm sorry, Twitter, but I thought it was, okay. And it shows you that, let me just show you the front, or the top of it, I should say, if I can get to it. You recognize that as
Yes.
your Twitter?
Yes.
Okay. And you recognize one of the people that you're following is Robert Zimmerman Jr., Mr. Zimmerman's brother, right here?
I see it says that, but if you know anything about me and Twitter, I hardly know how to use that.
So how did this Robert Zimmerman Jr. get on your Twitter account?
I would imagine I've probably gone on, and I've been very careful to not talk with any media, pick sides on anything. So if I went on his page and accidentally hit follow, that's a possibility. But
Before we move on from that,
it doesn't make sense that I would be so staying out of the media and everything and do something like that. That doesn't make.
Your belief is that this was just inadvertent?
Honestly, I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. I don't know who half of those people are.
Do you know how they got on your Twitter?
It says follow. It doesn't say following.
So what does that mean?
It means if I want to follow them, I would click that.
Right, but there's limited people that are on here, but this is your account. You acknowledge that, right?
Yeah, but I don't acknowledge that I clicked to follow them. It's asking me to do it now.
Do you have any idea of how that got on there?
I'm sorry.
No.
I apologize. Do you have any idea how that got on there?
No, I don't know how half of those got on there.
Okay. And I think you also, on your Facebook, you have as a friend Frank Taffy too, is that correct?
I'm sorry. On your Facebook, you have as a friend.
I'm sorry, Ms. Lauer, we're trying not to.
Oh,
I apologize, Madam Court Reporter. On your Facebook, do you also have Frank Taffy as a friend?
yes, he friend requested me. He's a neighbor.
Okay. Not because he's good friends or a supporter of George Zimmerman.
Not at all.
Is your testimony that you are not supporting either side in this case, is that correct?
That's my testimony.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions while we have that here. If I might.
I apologize, you need to get on the record.
Would you just announce for the court how many tweets that you have performed on the entirety of your experience on Twitter as a entity?
0.
Okay. Nothing further.
I don't know how to use this.
So you just have 112 following, is that correct?
They're following me.
Oh, they're following you. Robert Zimmerman Jr. is following you?
That's what that means, following, right?
And you've got 36 that are followers. What does that mean?
I don't know what those mean.
Okay.
Honestly, you tell me.
I'm not a Twitter person either.
Yes, you may.
But Ms. Lauer, would it be fair to say that those things just don't appear on your Twitter, do they?
That's not fair for me to say. I don't know how that works.
So you just have a Twitter account, but you don't know how it works?
Exactly.
Okay.
I hardly use it. Try to see the last time I logged in.
Okay. Do you believe at some point you were friends with Robert Zimmerman Jr. or even?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
I don't think I would have done that. That doesn't make sense for me to do that.
Do you think maybe it was he got on there on his own, or maybe George Zimmerman? Were you ever friends with George Zimmerman?
No, I never was.
Okay. I have nothing else regarding the proffer.
Okay, anything else regarding this proffer?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lauer, we're going to have you excused, but subject to being recalled. So that means that you're still under the court subpoena. The rule of sequestration for witnesses has been invoked, so that means you cannot discuss your testimony with anybody until this case is completed. And if called back to the courtroom, you must appear. You understand?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You'll be excused. State have another witness available?
Yes.
Sarah. Ready to call your next witness? So we're ready for the jury? Defense ready for the jury to come in?
Yes, we are, Your Honor.
Okay, come on in. Does anybody have that jury instruct? Let's see. I'll have to pull it up on the computer. I don't have it. Nope. Oh, okay.
Jury's ready, Your Honor.
Okay, please be seated. Mr. Guy, if you'll call your next witness, please.
Selma Moore.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall present will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Can I have the interpreter raise your right hand, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will well and truly translate these proceedings from English to Spanish and Spanish to English, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and you taking a seat. And before we get started, we'll need you, sir, to give your name for the record.
Yes, ma'am. Name is Jaime, Jaime, Sotomayor, Sotomayor.
Okay, thank. I'm sorry, what? He spelled his name, it's Jaime Sotomayor. Sotomayor. Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear testimony of a witness who will be testifying in Spanish. This witness will testify through the official court reporter interpreter. Although some of you may know Spanish, it is important that all jurors consider the same evidence. Therefore, you must accept the English translation of the witness's testimony. You must disregard any different meaning. If, however, during the testimony there is a question as to the accuracy of the English interpretation, you should bring this matter to my attention immediately by raising your hand. You should not ask your question or make any comment about the interpretation in the presence of the other jurors or otherwise share your question or concern with any of them. I will take steps to see if your question can be answered and any discrepancy resolved. If, however, after such efforts, a discrepancy remains, I emphasize that you must rely only upon the official English interpretation as provided by the court interpreter and disregard any contrary interpretation. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am. If you'd please tell the members of the jury your name.
Buenas tardes, señora. Por favor, ¿le puede dar el nombre suyo completo a los miembros del jurado?
Selma Mora.
Selma Mora.
In what city do you currently live?
¿En qué ciudad vive actualmente?
Miami.
Miami.
Could you spell your last name for us?
¿Nos puede deletrear el apellido?
M-O-R-A.
M-O-R-A.
Thank you. Are you employed?
¿Usted tiene empleo?
Sí.
Yes.
And what type of work do you do?
¿Qué tipo de trabajo hace usted?
Construcción.
Construction.
Specifically, what do you do within the field of construction?
Específicamente, ¿qué es lo que hace usted en el campo de la construcción?
Ventas de equipos para la construcción.
I sell equipment for construction work.
And approximately how long have you been in that type of work?
¿Y aproximadamente cuánto tiempo lleva usted en ese tipo de trabajo?
Un total de 9 años.
For a total of 9 years.
Are you a U.S. citizen?
¿Usted es ciudadana americana?
Sí.
Yes.
And where are you from originally?
¿Originalmente de dónde es?
Colombia.
Colombia.
How long have you been in the United States?
¿Cuánto tiempo lleva usted en los Estados Unidos?
12 años.
12 years.
Do you speak English?
¿Y usted habla inglés?
More.
Yes, a little.
Do you feel more comfortable with the interpreter?
Pero se siente más cómodo usando intérprete.
Definitivamente en este caso.
Most definitely in this case.
All right. Tell the members of the jury, please, what is your educational background?
Por favor, ¿le puede explicar a los miembros del jurado cuál es su trasfondo educacional?
Soy arquitecto y diseñador interior.
I am an architect and an interior designer.
And where did you receive your degrees?
¿Y de dónde recibió usted sus grados?
Los he recibido en Colombia, los originales, y tengo estudios también hechos aquí en los Estados Unidos.
I received them originally from Colombia, but I also have continued courses here in the United States.
And let me turn your attention to February of 2012. Where did you live at that time? What was the name of your community?
Vamos a traer su atención entonces a la fecha de febrero del 2012. ¿Dónde residía usted? ¿Cómo se llamaba la comunidad donde usted vivía?
Twin Lakes.
Twin Lakes.
And what was your street address?
¿Y cuál era la dirección de la calle?
2831 Retreat View Circle.
2831?
Retreat View.
Retreat View. 2831 Retreat View Circle.
And when did you move into that address?
¿Cuándo fue que usted se mudó a esa dirección?
En el 2007,
In 2007.
In February of 2012, did anyone else live at your address with you?
Para febrero del 2012, ¿alguien más vivía con usted en esa dirección?
sí.
Yes.
And who was that?
¿Quién era esa persona?
Bueno, mis hijos y mi amiga Mary Catcher con su hija.
My children and a friend, a female friend, her name is Mary
Mary Catcher,
Catcher.
How many children did you have?
¿Cuántos hijos tiene usted?
2.
2.
And what were your children's ages in February of 2012?
Para febrero del 2012, ¿qué edades tenían los niños?
9 y 14 años.
9 and 14 years old.
And was Mary Kuchar a friend of yours?
¿Y Mary Kutcher era amiga de usted?
Sí.
Yes.
And how old was Mary Kuchar's daughter in February 2012?
¿Qué edad tenía la hija de Mary Kutcher en febrero del 2012?
8 años.
8 years old.
You want me to approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Let me show you what's been marked as case 139 and ask you, get back here. Let me ask you to stand over here if you can. Just do you recognize your address on that diagram?
Déjeme preguntarle, mostrarle este documento que se ha marcado como pieza de evidencia. ¿Usted reconoce en este diagrama la dirección donde usted vivía?
Sí.
Yes.
Is it marked correctly at 2831?
¿Está marcado correctamente con el 2831?
Sí.
Yes.
Specifically then, let me turn your attention to the evening of February 26th, 2012. Were you at home that evening?
Específicamente voy a traer su atención a la tarde, temprano en la noche del 26 de febrero del 2012. ¿Usted se encontraba en su hogar?
Sí.
Yes.
And was anyone else at home that evening?
¿Esa noche había alguien más en el hogar?
Mary.
Mary.
Were either of your children or Miss Kuchar's daughter at home that evening?
¿Alguno de los hijos de usted o la hija de la señora Kutcher estaba esa noche en el hogar?
No.
No.
Where were the children?
¿Dónde estaban los niños?
Los míos con su papá.
Mine were with their father.
Y
Do you recall where Mary Kuchar's daughter was?
¿Recuerda dónde estaba la hija de Mary?
hay que cruzar la calle donde mi stepdaughter,
Well, she was across the street at the, I don't know how to say it.
La hija mayor de mi ex marido.
She was with the eldest daughter of my former husband.
All right. Do you recall that weather that evening?
¿Usted recuerda cómo estaba el clima esa noche?
Sí.
Yes.
And what was that?
¿Cómo estaba?
Lluvioso y oscuro.
It was rainy and dark.
At some point that evening, did you hear any sounds coming from behind your townhome?
¿En algún momento de esa noche usted escuchó algún ruido que provenía de la parte trasera del hogar?
Sí.
Yes.
And what did you hear?
¿Qué fue lo que escuchó?
Un lloriqueo.
Like a crying.
And where were you when you heard that sound?
¿Y dónde estaba usted cuando escuchó ese sonido?
En la cocina.
In the kitchen.
And is your kitchen, was that in the back of your townhome?
Y la cocina queda en la parte trasera del apartamento.
Correcto.
Yes, that's correct.
And by back, do you mean back towards the dog walk?
Y por la parte trasera, ¿usted quiere decir la parte que queda hacia donde caminan los perros?
Sí.
Yes.
Did your kitchen have a window?
¿La cocina suya tenía una ventana?
Sí.
Yes.
And was the kitchen window open or closed that evening?
Esa noche usted tenía la ventana de la cocina abierta o cerrada.
Estaba abierto hasta la mitad.
¿Perdón?
Estaba abierto hasta la mitad.
It was open halfway.
Was there any other background noise in your kitchen at the time you heard the crying sound?
Al momento que usted oyó este sonido de como lloriqueo, ¿había algún ruido en la cocina, en el trasfondo?
No.
No.
Can you describe for the jury what the crying sound sounded like to you?
¿Usted le puede describir al jurado cómo le sonó a usted ese sonido del lloriqueo?
Era como en 2, 3 oportunidades como
It was like a,
Could you tell whether or not the crying sound was coming from an adult or a child?
¿Usted pudo distinguir si ese sonido?
Speculation.
Sustained.
Was the crying sound, how was it soft or was it hard or what?
¿Ese sonido del lloriqueo era suave, bajo, era alto? ¿Cómo era?
suave.
It was soft, low.
Could you make out any specific words that were being said?
¿Usted pudo distinguir alguna palabra en específico que se estuviera hablando?
No.
No.
When you heard the crying, did you look out your kitchen window?
Cuando usted oyó este llanto, el lloriqueo, ¿usted miró por la ventana de la cocina?
Sí.
Yes.
Could you see anything outside when you looked out your kitchen window?
¿Usted pudo ver algo hacia afuera cuando miró por la ventana de la cocina?
Estaba muy oscuro, no pude ver nada.
It was too dark, I was not able to see anything.
After you heard the crying sounds, did you hear any other sound that caught your attention?
Después de oír este sonido de llanto, de lloriqueo, ¿usted pudo escuchar algo más que le llamara la atención?
Sí.
Yes.
And what was that?
¿Qué fue eso?
Un sonido seco que lo describo como si fuera como un scooter o algún elemento de un niño que se hubiera caído.
It was like a dry sound, which I have described as, like the thump of a child falling, is what I have called it.
Como un longboard. Lo que tienen niños saben que ellos al brincar, cuando lo botan, suena de una manera seca y fuerte.
Okay.
Longboard.
Longboard. It's like a longboard, those of you who have children, you know that when you bounce on it, it sounds like this dry thump. It's strong.
Did you think it was a gunshot when you heard it?
¿Usted pensó que era un disparo cuando lo escuchó?
No,
No.
Did you hear any of the crying sounds after you heard that sound?
Después de haber escuchado este sonido que usted describe, ¿oyó más del llanto?
no.
No.
And what did you do when you heard the sound that we're discussing?
¿Y qué hizo usted cuando escuchó este sonido que estamos mencionando ahora?
Corrí hacia la parte de atrás, por donde queda el porch.
I ran towards the back where the porch is located.
Did you go outside?
¿Usted salió afuera?
Sí, hasta donde un screen que tengo
Yes, as far as a screen that I have.
me lo permitió llegar.
That's as far as it allowed me to go.
All right. And describe for the jury how your back porch was screened in. Was it screened in from the floor to the ceiling, or was it a half wall, or what?
Y la terraza suya del patio, ¿cómo es que usted la tiene con el screen, la tela metálica? ¿La tiene desde el piso hasta el techo o a mitad o cómo lo tiene?
Es hasta más o menos la mitad.
I would say
de
it's
la
more or less
cintura.
about halfway, about waist high.
And what was the purpose of that screen?
¿Y cuál era el propósito de esa pantalla?
Parar que el perrito de mi hija se pudiera salir.
Well, in order to avoid my daughter's little dog from going out.
All right. So your daughter had a dog at the time?
Entonces, ¿su hija tenía un perrito?
Sí.
Yes.
All right. Did the screen on your porch, did it outline the outside of the porch?
Esta pantalla que había en la terraza posterior, ¿era el mismo contorno de la terraza completa?
Sí.
Yes.
Let me ask you, if the sound that you heard, if you thought it was a gunshot, would you have run outside?
Déjeme preguntarle, si usted hubiera pensado que el sonido que usted escuchó era un disparo, ¿usted hubiera corrido hacia afuera?
Nunca.
¿No?
Nunca.
No, not at all.
All right. When you got outside, was the crying sound that you heard coming from your right or your left?
Cuando usted corrió hacia afuera, ¿el llanto que usted había escuchado venía de la derecha o de la izquierda suya?
De mi derecha.
From my...
Just to clarify, I think the timing of the sounds that she just testified to, I would ask for clarification.
Okay, if you'll please clarify.
Yes. The sounds that you heard originally in your kitchen, as you're facing the back of your residence in your kitchen, were those sounds coming from your right or your left?
El ruido, el sonido que usted escuchó originalmente desde la cocina, cuando usted está mirando desde la cocina hacia la parte posterior de la casa, ¿le quedaba ese ruido hacia la derecha o hacia la izquierda?
Derecha.
To my right.
And when you got outside, did you look in that direction? That is, to your right.
Y cuando usted salió al exterior, usted miró hacia esa dirección, hacia la derecha.
Correcto.
That's correct.
Did you see any people when you looked to your right?
¿Usted vio alguna persona, vio gente cuando miró hacia la derecha?
Sí.
Yes.
How many?
¿Cuántas?
Dos.
Two.
You know, I might approach again. Let me show you states 139 again.
Déjame volver a mostrar la pieza de evidencia 139.
And 2831 is your residence?
Y la 2831 es la casa suya, ¿verdad?
Does this figure right here, is that the approximate location of where you saw the two people when you got outside and looked to the right?
Esta
Sí.
marca que vemos aquí es el lugar aproximado donde usted vio a las dos personas cuando usted salió al exterior a mirar hacia allá.
Sí.
Yes.
And the porch you were looking at would have been back here?
Y la terraza donde usted estaba mirando sería por acá.
Sí.
Yes.
For the record, Judge, I indicated the porch at 2831.
Record will so reflect.
Yara, could you dim the lights for one moment? Ms. Moore, if I count 1, 2, 3, is this the approximate location of your residence?
Si yo cuento 1, 2, 3, la cuarta sería aproximadamente el local donde queda la residencia suya.
Sí.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you got outside on your back porch, did you hear any more of the crying?
Cuando usted salió a la terraza posterior, ¿usted oyó algo más de ese llanto?
No.
No.
How were the two people positioned that you saw?
¿Cómo estaban ubicadas las dos personas que usted vio?
Había una en el suelo.
One of them was on the ground,
Y el otro estaba encima en una posición encaballada.
and the other one was on top in a position like a rider,
Like riding a horse
como si estuviera montado en un caballo.
Sí.
Yes.
with one leg on each side?
Con una pierna en cada lado.
Sí.
Yes.
The person on top, could you tell if that was a man or a woman?
La persona que estaba arriba, ¿usted podía distinguir si era hombre o mujer?
No en ese momento.
Not at that point in time.
And in what direction was the person on top facing relative to you?
¿Y en qué dirección quedaba mirando la persona que estaba arriba desde el punto de vista suyo?
Él está mirando hacia donde está los botes de basura.
He was facing towards where the trash receptacles are located.
May I approach you? And by trash receptacle, do you mean this, the dog waste receptacle?
Y por bote de basura, ¿tú quieres decir donde se ponen los desperdicios del perro?
Sí.
Yes.
All right. So they're facing in this direction.
O sea que estaban mirando en esa dirección.
Correcto.
That's correct. No te pegues tanto de distorsión.
Could you tell whether the person on top was white, black, Hispanic, or what?
¿Usted podía distinguir si la persona que estaba arriba era blanco, negro, hispano o algo?
La poca luz que había en ese momento no me permitía mirar mucho los colores.
What little light there was at that time did not allow me to see very well what color.
Could you see anything about the clothing of the person on top?
¿Usted podía distinguir algo sobre la vestimenta de la persona que estaba arriba?
Lo único que puedo decir es que tenía algunos patrones entre negro y rojo.
The only thing that I could say is that it was some sort of a pattern between blacks and reds.
And where were the hands of the person who was on top when you got outside?
¿Y dónde tenía las manos la persona que estaba arriba cuando usted salió?
En ese momento no podría decirlo, pero tenía que tener, o sea, sus brazos estaban apoyados sobre alguna parte de esta persona que estaba en el suelo.
Well, at that point in time, I couldn't really tell, but he must have been supported on some part of the person who was laying on the ground.
La parte que yo podía observar era su costado.
Because the part that I was
derecho.
able to observe was mostly his right hand side.
And what do you mean he was able to support himself? What do you mean by that?
¿Y qué quiere decir usted que él estaba apoyado? ¿Qué quiere decir?
Porque estaba casi que en la misma posición, agachada.
Because he was almost in the same position, you know, like stooping over, like the person who was on the ground.
Did you hear the person on top say anything at that time?
¿Usted escuchó a la persona que estaba encima decir algo en ese momento?
No,
No.
The person on the bottom, how were they positioned?
La persona que estaba abajo, ¿cómo estaba ubicada?
en ese momento no lo podría describir.
At that point in time, I couldn't describe it.
All right. Was the person laying down?
Pero la persona estaba acostada?
Sí.
Yes.
Could you tell if the person on the bottom was a man or a woman?
¿Usted pudo distinguir si la persona que estaba abajo era hombre o mujer?
No.
No.
Could you tell if the person on the bottom at that time was on their back or their stomach?
¿Usted pudo distinguir si la persona en esos momentos, la que estaba abajo, estaba de espalda o estaba de lado?
No.
No.
Did you see any movement from the person on the bottom?
¿Usted vio algún movimiento de la persona que estaba abajo?
Sí.
Yes.
And what was that?
¿Cuál fue?
Un poco sus piernas. Un pequeño pateo.
A little bit of a leg movement, like a shudder.
Did you say anything to the two people when you went outside?
Cuando usted salió al exterior, ¿le dijo algo a esas dos personas?
Sí.
Yes.
What did you say?
¿Qué dijo?
¿Qué está sucediendo?
What's going on?
Did you say it loud enough so those two people could hear you?
¿Lo dijo suficientemente alto como para que esas dos personas la pudieran oír?
Sí.
Yes.
And did you talk to them in English or Spanish?
¿Y lo dijo en español o en inglés?
En inglés.
En English.
Can you say for us in English what's going on or what are you doing?
¿No podría decir qué palabras usó?
What's going on?
Did the person on the bottom respond in any way when you said that?
¿La persona que estaba abajo respondió en alguna forma cuando usted dijo eso?
Nadie respondió.
Nobody answered.
Did the person on top respond in any way?
¿La persona que estaba arriba tampoco respondió?
Solo me volteó a mirar, pero no hubo respuesta.
The only thing was that he turned to look, but I don't remember anything else.
No.
Perdón.
Lo que dije fue que me volteó a mirar, pero no hubo respuesta.
Okay. ¿Tú te volteaste a mirar?
Él me volteó a mirar a mí,
Él se
pero
volteó a
no
mirar.
respondió.
The problem is that in Spanish the pronouns are sometimes omitted, so the person turned around to look but did not respond, did not issue a response.
All right, and are you talking about the person on top now?
Y tú estás hablando de la persona que estaba arriba en ese momento.
Sí.
Yes.
Did you say anything to the person on top when they turned and looked at you?
¿Tú le dijiste algo a la persona que estaba arriba cuando se volteó y te miró?
Volví a preguntar, ¿qué pasa?
I asked again what's going on.
And did that person answer you the second time you asked?
¿Y es la segunda vez que preguntaste, esa persona te contestó?
No.
No.
Did you ask again what's going on?
¿Tú volviste a preguntar what's going on?
Sí.
Yes.
And did anybody respond to you that time?
¿Y en esa ocasión alguien te respondió?
Sí.
Yes.
And who responded to you?
¿Quién te respondió?
La persona que estaba arriba.
The person who was on top.
And what did the person on top say?
¿Y qué dijo la persona que estaba arriba?
Solamente llamé a la policía.
Just to call the police.
Did you ever hear the person on the bottom say anything?
¿En algún momento escuchaste a la persona que estaba abajo decir algo?
No.
No.
At any point, did you see either the person on top or the person on the bottom get up?
¿En algún momento tuviste a la persona que estaba arriba o la persona que estaba abajo levantarse?
Sí.
Yes.
Who did you see get up?
¿A quién viste tú levantarse?
El que estaba arriba.
The one who was on top.
And what did the person on top do when they got up?
¿Y qué hizo la persona que estaba arriba cuando se levantó?
Caminó, dio unos pequeños pasos de donde estaba el cuerpo
He walked, he took a few steps from where the body was
en dirección hacia el basurero de los perros.
in the direction towards the dog, the rubbish receptacle.
All right. Could you see whether or not the person who was up right now, who had been on top, could you see whether or not at that point there was a man or a woman?
En esos momentos tú pudiste ver, una vez que la persona ya estaba levantada, la persona que había estado encima, ¿pudiste distinguir si era hombre o mujer?
Sí.
Yes.
And what was it?
¿Qué era?
Hombre.
A man.
And what did the man do after he got up and started walking towards the dog waste receptacle?
¿Y qué hizo esta persona una vez se levantó y caminó hacia el bote de la basura del perro?
Caminó unos cuantos pasos.
He walked for a few steps.
Regresó. Mientras hacía este recorrido, tocaba su cabeza
And
con una mano.
he walked towards the receptacles, then he walked back, and while he was doing this pacing, he would put his hands up on his head
Una
once,
mano, la
One
otra la
hand.
tenía en su cadera, ¿no?
And he had the other hand on his waist.
All right. Can you stand up for us and just place your hands how the man had his hands when he was walking around?
¿Tú puedes, por favor, entonces ponerte de pie y poner las manos en la posición en que la tenía el hombre según iba caminando?
Así.
Like this.
All right. And just for the record, her right hand was on her head and her left hand was on her left hip. Miss Moore, when the man was upright and walking back and forth, did he appear to be having any trouble walking?
Señora Mora, cuando el hombre estaba ya parado y caminando hacia adelante y hacia atrás, ¿aparentaba tener alguna dificultad en caminar?
No.
No.
Did you ever see the man stumble or stagger when he was upright walking around?
¿En algún momento viste al hombre tropezarse o tambalearse según estaba caminando?
No.
No.
Did you hear the man who was walking around say anything when he was walking around?
¿Tú escuchaste a este hombre que estaba caminando decir algo mientras caminaba?
No.
No.
When the man on top got up and started walking around, could you see the man on the bottom or the person on the bottom better?
Cuando esta persona se levantó y estaba caminando, ¿tú pudiste ver a la persona, el hombre o la persona que estaba abajo, lo pudiste ver mejor?
Sí.
Yes.
Could you tell at that point whether or not the person on the bottom was on their stomach or their back?
Y en ese momento, ¿pudiste distinguir si la persona que estaba abajo estaba boca abajo o boca arriba?
Estaba boca abajo.
He was face down.
And after the man on top got up and was walking around, did you ever see someone out there with a flashlight?
Y después de que este hombre que estaba arriba estaba parado y caminando, ¿tú pudiste ver a alguien por allí con una linterna?
Sí.
Yes.
And what did you do when you saw someone else out there with a flashlight?
¿Y qué hiciste tú cuando viste que había otra persona allá afuera con una antorcha a la mano, una linterna?
En ese momento, por mi amiga que estaba gritando desde la parte de atrás, había sido una bala.
Well, at that moment, because of my female friend who was screaming behind me that it had been a gunshot,
Ya quise entrar a mi casa, pero antes
I felt like going back inside the house, but before that,
una de las vecinas del lado del frente iba saliendo
one of the female neighbors from across was coming out.
y le grité que se devolviera, que aparentemente eran tiros.
And I screamed at her to go back because apparently there was shooting.
All right. Your Honor, may I approach? Show this one more time. Ms. Moore, if you would show the members of the jury, please, approximately where the female was that you saw step outside.
¿Le puede explicar aproximadamente a los miembros del jurado dónde fue que usted vio a la señora que dice que salió?
Del 1251.
From 1251.
All right. And at that point, you turned around and ran inside?
Y en ese momento usted se volteó y corrió hacia adentro.
Sí.
Yes.
And I believe you said that your female friend said that was a gunshot. Were you speaking about Mary Kuchar?
Y me parece que usted mencionó que su amiga dijo que había sido un disparo. ¿Eso usted se refiere a Mary Kuchar?
Correcto.
That's correct.
And what was Mary Kuchar doing when you got back inside?
¿Y qué estaba haciendo Mary Kuchar cuando usted se regresó adentro?
Estaba el teléfono en el área de la sala comedor, que es justo
She was on
en
the
el
phone
primer piso.
in the area of the living room, dining room. You know, it's one area.
And do you know who Mary Kuchar was talking to on the phone when you got back inside?
¿Y usted sabe con quién estaba hablando Mary Kuchar cuando usted se regresó adentro?
Con el 911.
911.
Did you and Miss Kuchar stay at your residence that evening?
¿Usted y la señora Kuchar se quedaron en la residencia esa noche?
Sí.
Yes.
And did the police come to your residence that evening?
¿Y esa noche la policía vino a la casa?
En la parte de atrás estaban cerrándolo y un policía, ella era la que más estaba hablando con el agente.
Well, they had closed up the back area of the houses, and there was a police officer, and she did most of the speaking with the police officers.
And when you say she, are you referring to Mary Kuchar?
Y cuando usted dice ella, se refiere a Mary Kuchar.
Correcto.
Correct.
At some point, did you speak with the Sanford Police Department in this case?
Pero en algún momento usted habló con miembros de la policía del Departamento de Policía de Sanford en este caso.
No esa noche,
Not that night.
pero el agente nos entregó un documento, un
But
papel,
an agent gave us a document, a piece of paper,
en el cual nos solicitaba que si queríamos escribir algo, lo hiciéramos en ese papel y lo
which
devolviéramos.
requested that if we wanted to write something down, we should do so on that piece of paper.
And what did you do in terms of writing something down? Did you write out a statement, or did you have Ms. Kuchar write out a statement, or what?
¿Y qué hizo usted? Usted, en cuanto a esto de poner algo por escrito, ¿usted preparó una declaración por escrito? ¿Le pidió a Mary Kuchar que preparara la declaración por escrito? ¿Qué hicieron?
Mary lo hizo porque yo estaba más ahí tratando de comunicarme con mi ex esposo
Well, Mary
para
did
que
so
no me trajeran los niños en ese momento.
because I was trying to contact my former husband so that he would not be bringing the children back home at that point in time.
All right, and at some point, did you speak with the police in person?
¿Y en algún momento usted habló con la policía en persona?
Fue tal vez como unos 4 días después, tal vez.
That may have been about 4 days later, maybe.
And did you tell the police what you had seen and heard that evening?
Y usted le dijo a la policía lo que usted había visto y había escuchado esa noche.
Sí.
Yeah.
Ms. Moore, had you ever met a young man named Trayvon Martin?
¿Usted alguna vez conoció a un joven de nombre Trayvon Martin?
Nunca.
Never.
To your knowledge, had you ever met a man named George Zimmerman?
¿Que usted tuviera conocimiento, en algún momento conoció a un hombre de nombre George Zimmerman?
No, nunca.
No, never.
And had you lived in that same unit continuously since 2007?
¿Y usted había estado viviendo en esa misma unidad continuamente desde el 2007?
Sí.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
I was getting ready to prepare some coffee.
Okay. Were you doing that in a location in the kitchen so that you were facing the back window?
¿Y usted estaba haciendo eso en un lugar de la cocina que quedaba mirando hacia la ventana de la cocina?
Mi cafetera estaba ubicada de tal manera de que la ventana estaba a mi derecha.
Well, the coffee maker was located in such a position that the window was on my right-hand side.
Right inside. So, for my purposes, this is the window.
Así que para propósitos de él, la ventana me queda aquí
Coffee machine over here.
y la cafetera está allá.
Sí.
Yes.
And that's what you're working on?
Y ahí era que usted estaba trabajando.
Sí.
Yes.
The first thing you heard was what you identified as cries.
Lo primero que usted escuchó, lo que usted identificó como un lloriqueo, como un llanto.
Sí.
Yes.
May I approach the witness for a moment, Your Honor? We're going to use this again. This is your apartment, correct?
Este es el apartamento suyo, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Yes.
Sí.
This is your porch area?
Y este es el área de la terraza.
Correcto.
Correct.
I see right there a little L-shaped. That's a column, correct?
Y yo veo que aquí hay una columna, una forma de L que hay una columna, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Yes.
And we'll get to this in a moment, but you actually reached out over that column to see what you saw later,
Y vamos
correct?
a entrar en más detalles más adelante, pero usted tuvo que
Later.
sobresalirse por encima de esta columna para poder ver lo que estaba pasando más adelante, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Yes.
This is the kitchen area,
Este
right
es el área de
here?
la cocina aquí, ¿verdad? Correct.
And the window sort of in the center.
Y la ventana queda como en el centro.
Sí.
Yes.
Bushes, the bushes were here,
¿Hay arbustos ahí afuera?
Sí, bajitos.
Yes, low.
and there's bushes everywhere here, correct?
Y aquí hay arbustos por todos estos lugares, ¿verdad?
Correcto.
Correct.
Okay. Low, this high,
Bajito
Sí.
como así,
about 3 feet high.
como de 3 pies.
Correcto.
Correct.
With what you heard, you didn't see anything the first time, correct?
Con lo que usted escuchó no vio nada en ese momento por primera vez, ¿verdad?
And what you heard,
I'm
rain-
sorry.
Correcto,
Yes.
sí.
Correct.
did I not wait? Sorry. And what you heard came from this area.
Y lo que usted escuchó vino de esta área.
Definitivo.
Could you
Sorry.
tell? Could,
No te pude escuchar. Could you repeat?
Definitivo, sí.
Definitely.
could you tell how far down the noise came from?
¿Tú pudiste determinar como a qué distancia venía ese ruido?
Son sonidos y no podría predeterminar
Follow Deputy Jarvis.
distancias.
It was just sounds. I was not able to predetermine a distance.
Además, porque no era algo a lo cual estuviera prestando atención, simplemente llegaron
In addition to
en
the
el
fact that it
momento que
wasn't
yo estaba en la
something
cocina.
that I wasn't paying attention to, it was simply something that reached me while I was working in the kitchen.
Could have been from this area right here, correct?
Pero pudo haber sido de esta área de acá, ¿correcto?
Correcto.
Correct.
Could have been from this area here, correct?
Y pudo haber sido de esta área más arriba, ¿verdad?
De mi casa para arriba, cualquier punto.
From my house upward in that direction, anywhere.
Thank you. You only heard 2 screams though, correct?
Y tú solamente escuchaste como 2 gritos, ¿verdad?
And I'm sorry, I said screams, you said 2 cries,
Y
correct?
perdóname porque dije gritos, pero tú dijiste que era un llanto.
El sonido que describo como un llanto, sí.
The sound that I have described as a cry, yes.
2.
2,
Sí.
yes.
You've listened, since that day, you've listened to the 911 calls that have the screams on it, correct?
Luego de esa fecha, tú has escuchado una llamada al 911 donde se oyen unos llantos, ¿verdad?
Por supuesto.
Of course.
Did any of those screams on the 911 call now to you sound as though they may have been 2 of the cries that you heard?
¿Alguno de esos gritos que se escuchan en esa llamada al 911 ahora te suena como los llantos que tú escuchaste esa noche?
Podría ser.
It could be.
Okay. On that 911 call that you did listen to, you didn't hear your voice at all, did you?
En esa llamada del 911 que tú escuchaste, no escuchaste la voz tuya en absoluto, ¿verdad?
No es algo que le estuviera prestando mucha atención, la verdad.
Well, it wasn't something that I was
nunca-
really paying much attention to, you know?
Pero no, nunca.
No, but I never did.
Okay. I'm curious because you said that you yelled to a neighbor across the courtyard.
Me está curioso porque tú mencionaste que tú le gritaste a una vecina que queda al otro lado de este patio.
Correcto.
That's correct.
You didn't hear that on the tape though, did you?
Y eso no lo escuchaste en la grabación de la llamada.
Lo que digo, no he prestado mucha atención al detalle.
Well, as
pero
I
puedo
said-
decir que no.
As I have not paid much attention to those details, but I could say no.
And I'm not saying by that you didn't yell to your neighbor across the way. I'm just saying that having yelled to your neighbor across the way, it just didn't make it onto that tape, did it?
Y yo no estoy diciendo que tú no le hayas gritado a la vecina que queda al otro lado, pero lo que te estoy diciendo es que aún habiéndole gritado a la vecina, eso sencillamente no se escuchó en la grabación.
Depende de cuál grabación, porque no existe solamente una.
Well, that would depend on which recording we're talking about because there's not just one.
Y si hablamos de las que están más lejos de mí, posible y no se escucha. De
And if we're
pronto,
talking about anyone who was further away from me, then it's possible you can't hear it there.
La única que podría haberse cogido más cercano sería la llamada que Mary estaba haciendo.
The only one that could have picked it up from closer was the call that Mary was making.
Correct.
Correcto.
Do you know, just so we're clear, you had yelled to your neighbor before Mary Kutcher got on her call, didn't you?
Pero para que esté claro, ¿tú estás consciente si tú le gritaste a tu vecina antes de que Mary tomara el teléfono?
Todo ha ocurrido tan rápido que no podría yo asegurar eso.
Well, everything happened so quickly that I wouldn't be able to assure you of that.
When you heard the noise that you now know to have been the gunshot, you did not know it was a gunshot then, correct?
Y cuando tú escuchaste el ruido que tú ahora sabes que fue un disparo, tú en ese momento no sabías que había sido un disparo, ¿verdad?
Correcto.
Correct.
I think you said you thought it was like a child's longboard, like a skateboard,
Y tú mencionaste que esto es como un longboard de lo que usan los niños, un skateboard, una
Correcto.
patineta. Yes,
slapping on cement,
Dándole al concreto.
Correcto.
Correct.
and that's what you thought you heard.
Y eso fue lo que tú pensaste que había escuchado.
Así es.
That was so.
Is that because kids play out there sometimes and you've heard noises similar to that in the past out
Eso
in that
porque,
same area?
eso es porque a veces los niños juegan allá afuera y tú has escuchado ruidos de esa clase en esa área.
Así es.
That is so.
So it made more sense that it was a noise from a child than a gunshot, correct?
Así que a ti te hacía más sentido que fuera un ruido de un niño a que fuera un disparo.
Por supuesto.
Of course.
Now, when you did hear that noise, thinking that it was a child, you went to find out what it was, correct?
Y cuando tú escuchaste ese ruido pensando que había sido un niño, tú saliste a ver qué estaba sucediendo.
Así es.
That is so.
Okay. And you left the kitchen area,
Y saliste del área de la cocina,
went to the sliding glass door,
fuiste a la puerta corrediza de cristal,
and that, yes?
¿verdad?
Yes.
Yes.
And that was partially open, but you had to open it the rest of the way to go out, correct?
Y ya estaba parcialmente abierta, pero tú tuviste que abrirla por completo para poder salir, ¿verdad?
Estaba abierta de tal manera que yo podía cruzar.
It was open so far that I was able to come across,
Without opening it further.
sin tener que abrirla más.
No.
No.
Okay. So, I'm going to ask you to demonstrate for me something,
Voy a pedirte que me demuestres algo.
because I'm wondering if you can tell us, and that I want you to show us in the courtroom,
Ujú.
when you heard the noise,
Porque lo que me estoy preguntando y quiero que nos lo demuestres y nos muestres en el sala cómo sería, es que cuando
What
tú
you-
escuchaste el ruido,
what you did in the kitchen or with the coffee,
¿qué tú hiciste en la cocina con el café o lo que fuera?
how you left the kitchen,
¿Cómo saliste de la cocina?
got to the sliding glass door,
¿Cómo llegaste a la puerta corrediza de
got
cristal?
through it,
¿La pasaste?
got to the patio,
¿Llegaste al patio
and looked down.
y miraste en aquella
Can you do
dirección?
that?
¿Lo puedes hacer?
Por supuesto.
Of course.
Your Honor, I would ask that the witness step down.
Te voy a pedir que pases entonces al frente y hagas la demostración.
As we do this, I'm going to presume that you were not wearing high heels.
Voy a asumir que esa noche no llevaba puesto taco.
I either apologize for asking you to do it in high heels, or I suggest that you take them off.
Te voy a pedir excusas si lo quieres hacer en los tacos altos o si te quieres quitar los zapatos.
So, to set this up, I need your help.
Porque
To
para
tell me
establecerlo necesito tu ayuda.
where the, whatever area, kitchen if it works, sliding glass door if it works,
Tú
you
escoges el
set
área.
the stage and tell us where you were and then what you did and what you had to get around to do it,
Tú
okay?
preparas la escena, lo que tú quieras escoger como si fuera la cocina, como queda el área de donde está la puerta corrediza, donde está la terraza. Tú preparas la escena y entonces nos describes qué fue lo que tú hiciste.
Lo más parecido a la arquitectura
Well,
de
the most
los,
similar to our architecture
es que la puerta podría estar en este sector.
would be that the sliding door could be in this area.
Aquí. Este
Like
es el
here.
sliding
This
door.
is the sliding glass door,
Exacto.
Exactly.
okay?
Column.
The
Column.
column.
So,
And,
here is the
excuse me?
column.
And then you go out and look that way, correct?
Entonces tú saliste y miraste en esa
Okay.
dirección.
This is the kitchen.
Column. Just, I don't want to be the one testifying, so you do it,
Si lo puedes hacer tú porque
Here
tú
is the
quieres.
kitchen.
okay?
They have it like, perdón.
Either way, if you can say it in English and you're comfortable, tell
Aquí
us.
está el mesón.
This is where the counter is.
So, si este es el mesón,
There, you have the counter here.
aquí está hacia el otro lado. Esto está, hay un muro.
And there's a wall here on the other
Yes.
side.
Y este es el área de trabajo donde está el zinc.
And this would be the work area where we have the sink
Correct.
and the window.
Okay,
Esta es mi posición.
And this was my position.
correct. So, here's what I'm going to do. As close to the speed as you think you did.
Así que lo que voy a hacer es que a la velocidad, lo más cercano a la velocidad que tú piensas
Don't
que lo
rush it
hiciste.
and don't go slow.
O sea, no quiero que lo hagas demasiado rápido ni que tampoco muy lento.
I'm going to clap my hands.
Pero él va a hacer.
And if
un
you
aplauso.
looked at the window when you heard the noise, I want you to look at the window. If you had a cup of coffee in your hand, I want you to put it down. You tell me what you did and do it in the timing as best you can that you did it, okay?
El agua ya estaba en la cafetera.
The water was already in the coffee maker.
Coloqué el vaso.
And I put the cup.
En ese momento estaban los llantos.
And at that moment, I heard the cries.
Okay, you.
Terminé de colocar el
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you for a second. The point that I'm at is when you heard the noise,
El
not
punto que yo
the, not
te-
the cries.
El punto que te
okay?
quiero llevar es cuando tú escuchaste el ruido, no el llanto.
sonido.
The sound, I ran,
cross, and I grabbed the column, cogí la columna,
I held onto the column,
Okay,
hice así,
and I went like this.
okay.
agarraba la columna.
I went like that to
Right.
look around.
And I'm going to have to ask you to do it again.
Te voy a pedir que lo hagas otra vez.
Because I just want to make sure that the jury has a chance now that they know what you're doing, to just watch you do it one more time in about the time that you did it.
Porque quiero estar seguro de que ahora que el jurado sabe qué es lo que estamos haciendo, que ellos puedan medir el tiempo y ver la
La
posibilidad.
otra persona que estaba en la cocina era Mary.
Well, the other person who was in the kitchen with me was Mary.
Okay?
Estaba de este lado,
She was right on this side,
recostado.
like reclining.
Okay.
Escucho el sonido,
I heard the noise.
corro,
I ran.
cruzo,
I went across
and grab.
and I peered.
Great. And then when you peered out, you looked. Thank you very much.
Muy bien, gracias.
You heard the noise.
¿Tú escuchaste el ruido?
It took the time that it took you to get out, as we did, and then you looked down, and that's when you saw the people in the area that you've talked about already,
Tú
correct?
tomaste el tiempo que te tomó en salir, dar la vuelta, cruzar, salir afuera, y entonces miraste en la dirección, y ahí fue, cuando miraste en la dirección donde escuchaste el ruido, ahí fue que viste a las personas que tú dices que viste.
Correcto.
That's correct.
And I think you said, at that point, was it still dark?
Y me parece que dijiste que en ese momento estaba oscuro todavía.
And I think that
Yes, correct.
I think you testified that you could not see very well, correct?
Me parece que testificaste que que no podías ver muy bien.
La poca luz que había de las casas no permitía ver con claridad, pero se veían los
Well, what little light there was from the different houses did not allow you to see clearly, but you could still see
la silueta.
the silhouettes, the shapes.
Yes. And the silhouettes you saw, I think you testified to, was that there was a person crouching down over another person?
Y las siluetas que tú dijiste que viste fue una persona agachada sobre otra persona.
Correcto.
Correct.
And did that person, you're looking from the back perspective, you'll see his back, is
Y
that
tú estabas
correct?
mirando de una perspectiva de la espalda de él.
Yeah.
Tú estabas mirando la espalda.
So you see that person like this, correct? Not on his knees, but standing like this,
Tú ves a la
correct?
persona así, no que estaba de rodillas, sino así parado de cuclillas.
Me parece más que he siempre dicho porque vi más la parte de las rodillas en el piso. Y
Well,
los
I have always
antebrazos,
said, it seems to me more that what I saw was the person with the knees on the ground.
Ujú.
The person on top with knees on the ground.
La persona que estaba arriba tenía las rodillas en el suelo.
Sí.
Yes.
And you said that they had their hands on the person who was underneath?
Y tú dices que tenían las manos sobre la persona que estaba abajo.
Tiene que tenerlas en alguna parte, en alguna posición de la otra persona. Por
He
el
must have had
equilibrio
it-
que estaba haciendo.
He must have had it in some part, on some part of the other person, because of what the person was doing,
Por el equilibrio más.
in order to maintain a balance.
Okay. The way he was leaning over?
La forma en que estaba reclinado hacia el frente.
Correcto.
Did
Correct.
you also say that you thought he did something with his pocket?
Me parece que mencionaste algo del bolsillo.
Nunca.
No, not at all.
Did you say that in deposition? That you thought that he had done something with putting something near his pocket?
Absolutamente no.
No, absolutely not.
Then the person who was on top, could you see if they were moving, the person on the bottom is moving their hands or their arms at all?
I'm
Could you
sorry,
see
Calvin.
that?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Person on top. Could you see if that person on top was moving the hands or the arms of the person on the bottom?
La persona que estaba arriba, tú no pudiste distinguir si estaba moviéndole los brazos a la persona que estaba abajo.
No.
No.
And the person on top did not respond to the first two times that you called to him, correct?
Y la persona que estaba arriba no respondió a las primeras dos veces que tú lo llamaste, ¿correcto?
Correcto.
And then the third time he said, just call the police.
Y la tercera vez lo que dijo fue solamente llama a la policía.
Correcto.
Call the police. Correct.
And he then got up, correct?
Y entonces se levantó, se paró.
¿correcto?
And you said he
Correct.
was walking around.
Y tú dices que caminaba.
Caminó en dirección de los botes de basura y regresó
He walked
hacia
in
el cuerpo.
he walked in the direction of the trash cans, and then he returned to the body.
Puedo asumir que lo hizo tal vez unas 2, 3 veces antes de que apareciera la persona con el flashlight.
And I would assume that he did it about 2 or 3 times before this person with the flashlight showed up.
And he was putting his hand on his head.
Y se estaba poniendo la mano en la cabeza.
Correcto.
Correct.
How did he look to you? What did he look like he was doing?
¿Cómo se veía? O sea, ¿qué te pareció a ti que estaba haciendo?
No es cuestión de yo opinar, ¿verdad?
Well, it's not a matter of me giving an opinion.
Well,
Pero, permiso,
so,
Excuse me.
pero tenía una mano en su cabeza.
But he had one hand on his head.
Puedo asumir que en una posición tal vez como preocupado.
I would
Podría
assume,
pasar así.
like in a position like a person who's concerned.
just a moment, if I might, Your Honor. Was he acting as though he was confused?
¿Estaba actuando como una persona confundida?
No lo entiendo así.
Not to my understanding.
Do you remember in a deposition, we asked a question,
¿Tú recuerdas que en una
About-
deposición le hicieron una pregunta
your impression that he might be confused about what just happened?
sobre si te dio la impresión a ti de que él podía estar confundido de lo que acababa de suceder?
Es posible que así sea. Ujú.
It's possible that was so, yes.
And do you remember your answer?
¿Y recuerda lo que contestaste?
He mencionado que para mí él estaba en tono sí como preocupado.
Well, I have mentioned that for me, I would think he was acting like concerned.
Sort of like he couldn't believe what just happened?
Como-
Subject to that's called for speculation.
Well, then I'll approach with her answer to the deposition, if I might.
If she needs it to refresh her
Sure,
recollection.
I'll do that. So if I might approach the witness. Let me do this and show you, this is the deposition that we took of you.
Déjame mostrarte porque esta fue la deposición que te tomamos.
Focus your attention on page 25,
Voy a traer tu atención a la página 25.
starting with line 6. Let's start there.
Comenzando con la línea 6, vamos
So
a
if
empezar
you
por ahí.
would. Have you had a chance to review that?
¿Ya tuviste la oportunidad
Sí.
de revisarlo? Yes.
In that statement, did you say, how would you, the question being, did you see him go back towards the body? Yes, and how would you describe,
To this still, it's calm for speculation.
while it may be speculation, Your Honor, she testified to it in her deposition, I'm refreshing her recollection. I want to now
Well-
question her about that.
Well, but the proper way to refresh somebody's recollection is to say, have you now read it? Does that refresh her recollection? And see if it gives her an ability to give an answer.
Okay, then I'll just answer that way. In response to a question, how would you,
Ask her if that has, by reading that, has that refreshed her recollection?
I thought I did that at the bench, but I'll do it
No, you
again.
didn't.
Did that refresh your recollection in what you said in your deposition?
¿Con esto te refresca la memoria de lo que dijiste en la deposición?
Sí,
Okay. Now, so let me ask you, Ken, how would you describe his behavior?
Déjame,
Again, I object to this calm for speculation.
Well, is her description overruled?
Yes. How would you describe how he acted?
¿cómo describirías tú el comportamiento? ¿Cómo actuó él?
Si no más recuerdo, acabo de decirlo en español que como de una manera preocupante.
Well, if I remember correctly, and I have just mentioned it a little while ago too, he was acting like in a concerned manner.
Em,
I mean,
realmente de una manera como que pasó confuso.
well, it really, in a way, like what just happened, like confused.
Okay?
En mis palabras pudiera utilizar muchas otras para describir exactamente la misma manera en la que se pudo apreciar
And
desde mi punto de vista.
in my own words, I could probably use a lot of other words to describe, from my point of view, what it appeared like.
Is it accurate to say that he looked confused to you?
Pero sería justo decir que a ti te pareció confundido.
Podría ser.
It could be.
And that he walked away from the body and he walked towards the dog. And did you say he had his hand here? You said here at one point. Also here, correct?
Y tú dices que tenía las manos acá, allá.
Por la silueta, las sombras.
From the silhouettes and the shadows.
Definitivamente una mano estaba tocando su cabeza
He definitely had one hand touching his head,
y la otra la parte de sus caderas.
and the other one was around the waist.
Was it like this, somewhere here or here?
Pero era aquí, o en algún lugar aquí o acá,
And a hand over here?
y una mano acá,
And walking?
y caminando.
Pacing, you said?
Tú dices que caminaba hacia adelante y hacia atrás.
Caminó en dirección, regresó, volvió a caminar, volvió a regresar, caminó, el hombre de la luz apareció.
He walked in that direction, came back, then he walked in that direction again, came back again, and then he walked in that direction, and the man with the flashlight turned up.
Walked up, walked back, walked up, walked back, walked up, and the man with the flashlight came?
Dice que él caminó hacia allá, volvió, caminó hacia allá, volvió, caminó hacia allá, y ahí fue que apareció el hombre del flashlight.
Correcto.
Correct.
Was that part of what led you to believe he was acting confused?
¿Eso fue parte de lo que te hizo pensar a ti que él estaba actuando como confundido?
Puede ser.
It could be. Uh-huh.
I think you were asked if you had known George Zimmerman before that night. Had you?
Y te dejo de preguntar si tú habías conocido a George Zimmerman antes de esa noche. ¿Lo habías conocido?
Nunca.
Never.
Did you ever, when the man with the flashlight was there, did that flashlight allow you to get a better look at who you now know to be George Zimmerman?
Cuando llegó allí el hombre con el flashlight, ¿esa luz del flashlight te permitió ver mejor a esta persona que ahora tú sabes que era George Zimmerman?
No.
No.
Never saw him again that night or
¿No lo
Except
volviste a
for-
ver ni esa noche ni nunca más?
that
A
night?
la persona de la
Esa
luz
noche.
o a Zimmerman.
You mean the person with the flashlight or Zimmerman?
George Zimmerman.
A Zimmerman.
Nunca lo he visto en persona,
I've never-
solamente en las fotografías que se han expuesto de él.
I've never seen him in person. I've just seen the photographs that have been shown of him.
On TV and whatnot. Could you ever see him good enough when he was leaning over the body or when he stood up to see any blood on the back of his head?
¿En algún momento lo pudiste ver suficientemente bien cuando estaba recostado, reclinado sobre el cuerpo o cuando estaba parado y caminando como para poder ver que había sangre en su cabeza?
No.
No.
How about any blood on his nose as he was walking back those 2 times that you saw him walk back?
O sangre en la nariz cuando venía caminando de regreso, en esas 2 ocasiones que tú dices que lo viste caminando de regreso.
Como dije en el principio, estaba tan oscuro que las pocas luces no permitían describir con precisión
like I said from the beginning, it was so dark that what little light there was would not allow you to determine the details and precision.
Just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, may